The rope was still swinging from the oak tree when Samuel McAllister saw the girl's eyes roll back into her head. Her legs had stopped kicking. Her small hands, bound behind her back, had gone limp, and the men standing beneath her were laughing like they'd just finished a good joke at the saloon. Sam didn't think. He drew his Colt and fired into the sky. That single gunshot would echo through 20 years of his life. And the girl he cut down that day, she'd come back. With an army. If this story touches your heart, subscribe to my channel and stay with me until the very end. Drop a comment below telling me which city you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this tale has traveled. Now let me take you back to where it all began. The summer of 1865 had been the cruelest anyone could remember in Silver Creek, New Mexico territory. Samuel McAllister wiped the dust from his face as he guided his horse down the narrow trail toward Miller's Creek. He'd been riding since dawn, delivering supplies to the stagecoach station 12 miles out, and his throat was dry as sun-bleached bone. At 25, Sam had already learned the most important lesson the frontier could teach a man. Keep your head down, do your work, and don't get involved in other people's troubles. He'd seen what happened to men who played hero. His horse, a chestnut mare named Copper, suddenly pulled up short. Her ears flattened against her skull. "Easy, girl." Sam patted her neck. "What's got you spooked?" Then he heard it. Laughter. Ugly, brutal laughter rolling through the cottonwood trees near the creek. And beneath that laughter a sound that made his stomach turn. The creak of rope against wood. The desperate choking gasps of someone fighting for air. Every instinct Sam had cultivated over 8 years on the frontier screamed at him to turn around, to ride the other way, to pretend he hadn't heard a thing. He was halfway through pulling Copper's reins when a voice cut through the noise. Young, terrified, and fading fast. A girl's voice. "God help me," Sam muttered. He spurred Copper forward. The clearing opened up before him like a wound in the earth. 5 men stood in a loose circle beneath the oldest oak tree Sam had ever seen, its branches stretched out like dark arms against the burning sky. And from one of those branches hung a rope. At the end of that rope was a girl. Apache. Couldn't have been more than 16. Her hands were bound behind her back with rawhide strips, and the noose around her neck had already turned her face a terrible shade of purple. Her legs kicked weakly, so weakly like a bird with broken wings trying to fly. One of the men picked up a stone and threw it at her. It struck her ribs with a dull thud. "Dance, savage, dance for us!" More laughter. Sam's hand found his Colt before his mind could stop it. The gunshot split the air like thunder. Every head turned toward him. The laughter died. "What in the hell?" The largest of the men, a broad-shouldered fellow with a tobacco-stained beard, took a step forward. "McAllister, that you?" Sam recognized him now. Hank Dawson ran a small cattle operation on the other side of Silver Creek. They'd shared drinks at the saloon more than once. "Cut her down, Hank." Hank's eyes narrowed. "You gone soft in the head, Sam? This here's an Apache. Caught her stealing eggs from the widow Patterson's henhouse. She's a child. She's a savage." Hank spat tobacco juice onto the dry grass. "You know what her people did to the Morrison family last spring? Cut 'em up like Christmas hams? Man, woman, and 3 little ones." "I know what happened to the Morrisons." Sam kept his voice steady, his gun level. "This girl didn't do it." "How would you know?" "Because she was stealing eggs to eat Hank, not scalps." The other men shifted uneasily. Sam counted them. Hank, 2 farmhands he didn't recognize, old Pete Wheeler from the general store, and a young fellow who couldn't have been more than 19. 5 against 1. Bad odds. But the girl had stopped kicking. Sam cocked his Colt. "I said cut her down. I won't ask again." Hank's face darkened. "You're making a mistake, McAllister. You side with them, you're no better than them in the eyes of this town." "Then I reckon I'll have to live with that." For a long moment nobody moved. Then old Pete Wheeler, 70 years old if he was a day, shuffled forward with a knife in his hand. He'd been the one holding the other end of the rope, Sam realized. The one who'd hoisted her up. "Let him have his squaw," Pete muttered. "Ain't worth dying over." He cut the rope. The girl dropped like a stone. Sam was off Copper before she hit the ground. He caught her, barely her small body crashing into his arms, with what felt like no weight at all. She was so thin, so impossibly thin. He pressed his ear to her chest. A heartbeat. Faint, irregular, but there. "You just made yourself an enemy of every decent man in Silver Creek," Hank called out as Sam lifted the girl onto Copper's back. "When word gets out what you done here today, let it get out." Sam swung into the saddle, one arm wrapped around the unconscious girl to keep her from falling. "This ain't over, McAllister." Sam didn't look back. The ride to his cabin took 2 hours. 2 hours of feeling that small body slumped against his chest. 2 hours of checking every few minutes to make sure she was still breathing. 2 hours of asking himself what in God's name he'd just done. His cabin sat at the edge of his property, 280 acres of scrubland that he'd worked for 3 years to turn into something resembling a ranch. It wasn't much. A small house, a stable, a corral with a dozen head of cattle. But it was his. He carried the girl inside and laid her on his bed, the only bed in the place. In the dim light filtering through the window, he got his first real look at her. Young. So young. Angular face with high cheekbones. Long black hair matted with blood and dirt. A deep bruise was already forming around her neck where the rope had bitten into her skin. Her eyes fluttered open. Sam froze. Those eyes, dark as midnight but burning with something fierce and unbroken, locked onto his face. "Easy," he said, raising both hands. "Easy. You're safe now." She tried to speak. Nothing came out but a ragged whisper. "Don't try to talk. Your throat." Sam gestured awkwardly. "They hurt you pretty bad. Just rest." Those dark eyes never left his face, searching, measuring, trying to understand what kind of man would save her when every other white face she'd seen that day had wanted her dead. Sam pulled a chair to the bedside and sat down heavily. "My name's Sam. Samuel McAllister." He ran a hand through his hair. "I ain't gonna hurt you. I couldn't let them do what they were doing. You understand?" No response. Just those eyes watching. "You got a name." Silence. "All right. That's all right. You don't have to tell me nothing." He stood, moved to the small stove in the corner, and put a pot of water on to boil. His hands were shaking, he realized. He hadn't noticed until now. What had he done? Hank Dawson was right about one thing: word would spread. By morning, everyone in Silver Creek would know that Sam McAllister had pointed a gun at 5 white men to save an Apache girl. Some would call him a traitor. Others would call him worse. And what happened when her people came looking for her? The Chiricahua had been raiding settlements up and down the territory for months. If they thought he was holding one of their own captive, a sound from the bed made him turn. The girl was trying to sit up, her face twisted in pain, one hand pressed against her bruised throat. "Hey, hey!" Sam rushed back to her side. "Don't move. You'll hurt yourself worse." She shook her head violently, pointed at the door. "You want to leave?" Sam frowned. "You can barely breathe. You wouldn't make it a mile." Those dark eyes flashed with something like anger. "I know you don't trust me," Sam said quietly. "I wouldn't trust me either if I was you. But it's getting dark out there, and you've got no horse, no weapon, and no strength to run. So here's what's gonna happen. You're gonna rest here tonight. I'll sleep in the stable with Copper. In the morning, if you want to go, I won't stop you. I'll give you food, water, whatever you need." She stared at him. "That's a promise." Slowly, so slowly, she sank back onto the bed. Sam let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "All right, then." He gathered a blanket and headed for the door. At the threshold, he paused. "For what it's worth," he said without turning around. "I'm sorry for what they did to you. I'm sorry for all of it." He stepped out into the cooling night air. Behind him, in the darkness of the cabin, the girl who would change his life lay staring at the ceiling, her hand pressed against the raw wound around her throat. She did not cry. She had stopped crying the day she watched her entire family die. 3 days passed. The girl didn't speak a word. She ate what Sam offered her: beans, salt pork bread when he had it, but she watched him constantly, like a wild animal waiting for the trap to spring. He'd tried to check the wound on her neck, but she'd jerked away so violently that he'd nearly fallen backward over his own chair. "Suit yourself," he'd muttered. "But if it gets infected, that's on you." On the fourth morning, Sam rode into Silver Creek for supplies. He knew it was a mistake the moment he hitched Copper outside the general store. The usual morning bustle of the main street fell silent. Farmers stopped mid-conversation. Women pulled their children closer. Old Pete Wheeler, standing on the porch of his shop, turned his back and walked inside. Sam kept his head high and pushed through the door of the general store. Martha Cooper, the shopkeeper's wife, was behind the counter. She was a round, pleasant woman who'd always had a kind word for Sam, baked him a pie once when he'd helped her husband fix a broken wagon wheel. Today she looked at him like he was something scraped off the bottom of a boot. "Martha." Sam nodded. "I need flour coffee and whatever salt you've got." She didn't move. "Martha, we don't serve Indian lovers here." The words hit Sam like a fist to the gut. "Now hold on. You heard what happened at Miller's Creek." Martha's voice was cold. "The whole town's talking about it. You pulled a gun on Hank Dawson and his boys, for a savage. For a child. A child they were murdering for stealing eggs. She was Apache. She was 16 years old." Martha's jaw tightened. "You should leave, Mr. McAllister, before my husband comes back." Sam stood there for a long moment, the weight of her words settling over him like a shroud. So this was how it would be. "Keep your flour." He turned toward the door. "Keep all of it." He was halfway out when a voice stopped him. "McAllister." Sam turned. A man stood in the doorway to the back room, tall, thin, with silver hair and wire-rimmed spectacles. Dr. Elijah Whitmore, the only doctor in Silver Creek. "Doc," Sam said cautiously. Whitmore crossed to the counter, ignoring Martha's glare. He was carrying a small leather bag which he set down between them. "Medical supplies," he said quietly. "Bandages, carbolic acid for cleaning wounds, and willow bark tea for the pain. I assume your guest could use them." Sam stared at him. "I don't understand. You're helping me. I'm a doctor." Whitmore's voice was steady. "I took an oath to heal the sick. That oath didn't say anything about the color of their skin." Martha made a disgusted sound and retreated to the back room. "I can't pay you," Sam said. "I'm not asking for payment." Whitmore pushed the bag toward him. "I'm asking you to keep her alive, and then when she's strong enough, get her back to her people, before this town does something we'll all regret." Sam took the bag. It felt heavier than it should have. "Why are you doing this?" "Doc, really?" Whitmore was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I was at Sand Creek, Mr. McAllister. November of '64. I was a field surgeon with the Colorado militia." His hands trembled slightly. "I saw things there that no oath can ever absolve. So when I see a chance to save a life instead of watching one be taken, I take it." He turned and walked back toward the rear of the store without another word. Sam stood there holding the bag of medical supplies, feeling the weight of something he couldn't quite name. Then he walked out into the hostile silence of Silver Creek and rode home. The girl was gone. Sam burst through the cabin door and the bed was empty. The blanket lay crumpled on the floor. The window at the back of the cabin stood open. "No, no, no." He ran outside, scanning the scrubland in every direction. Nothing. The sun was high and brutal, and any tracks she'd left would be there. a flutter of movement near the old oak tree at the edge of his property, the same kind of oak tree where they'd strung her up. Sam approached slowly. She was sitting at the base of the tree, her knees pulled up to her chest, her face turned toward the twisted branches above. In her hand she held a single rope of braided rawhide, the same rawhide that had bound her wrists 4 days ago. She'd kept it, Sam realized. She'd kept the thing that had almost killed her. "Hey!" She didn't look at him. Sam stopped a few feet away, not wanting to spook her. "I brought medicine, real medicine from the doctor in town. It'll help your throat heal." "Nothing. Listen, I know you don't want to be here. I know you want to get back to your people, but you've got to let me help you first. You're hurt. You won't survive out there alone." Finally she spoke. Her voice was a ruined thing, cracked hoarse, barely human, but the words were clear. "Why?" Sam blinked. "Why what? Why did you save me?" It was the first time he'd heard her speak. 4 days of silence, and now this single word, this impossible question. Why? Sam sat down in the dirt a few feet from her, his back against the rough bark of the oak tree. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I really don't. I've spent my whole life staying out of other people's business, minding my own affairs, keeping my head down." He stared out at the cracked, sun-scorched earth of his ranch. "But when I saw you hanging there, when I saw those men laughing—" He trailed off. "Something broke," he said finally. "Something just broke." The girl was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "My mother used to tell me that some spirits walk between worlds. They do not belong to any tribe. They follow no law but their own." She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. She said, "They are dangerous, because you never know what they will do." Am I dangerous? I do not know yet. Sam almost smiled. Almost. "What's your name?" Another long pause. "Naylan." "Naylan," Sam repeated. "That's pretty. What does it mean?" "Maiden of the Dawn." He nodded slowly. "Well, Naylan, I'm Samuel McAllister. Sam to most folks. And I reckon we're stuck with each other for a while, so we might as well try to get along." Naylan looked up at the branches of the oak tree, those same dark arms that had held the rope around her neck. "I will never forget what happened here," she said quietly. "Never. But I will also never forget what you did." She stood still, unsteady, still weak but standing. "I will stay. I will let you help me heal. And then I will go back to my people." Sam stood too. Fair enough. They walked back toward the cabin together, the girl and the man who had saved her their shadows, stretching long across the broken earth. Neither of them knew that this single act of mercy would echo through the next 20 years. Neither of them knew that the rope still dangling from that old oak tree would one day be replaced by a school. And neither of them knew that the powerful men who watched from Silver Creek were already making plans that would not come to fruition for 2 decades, but would threaten to destroy everything Sam had built. Dr. Whitmore came 3 days later. He rode up to Sam's cabin just after dawn, his black medical bag clutched against his chest, glancing over his shoulder like a man afraid of being followed. "Doc." Sam met him at the door. "Didn't expect to see you out here. May I come in?" "The girl Naylan, she ain't exactly trusting of white folks right now. Can't say I blame her." "I understand, but I've brought something important." Sam hesitated, then stepped aside. Naylan was sitting at the small table in the corner of the cabin, a cup of willow bark tea cooling between her hands. When Whitmore entered, she went rigid, her dark eyes tracking his every movement. "Easy," Sam said. "This is the doctor I told you about, the one who sent the medicine." Whitmore removed his hat and held it against his chest, an old gesture of respect. "Miss," he said softly, "I mean you no harm. I only want to help." Naylan said nothing. Whitmore turned to Sam. May I examine her throat? The bruising was severe. I want to make sure there's no permanent damage to her voice. Sam looked at Nayland. Your call. A long moment passed. Then slowly, Nayland nodded. Whitmore approached carefully, like a man approaching a wounded hawk. He examined her throat with gentle fingers, checking the swelling, the coloration, the way she swallowed. You're fortunate, he said finally. The damage is superficial. Your voice will recover fully given time. Nolan's eyes flickered with something relief perhaps, but she said nothing. Whitmore stepped back. From his bag he pulled a small glass bottle filled with amber liquid. Honey mixed with calendula, he explained. It will soothe the throat and speed healing. A spoonful, morning and night. He placed the bottle on the table. Then he turned to Sam, and his expression changed. There's something else. Something you need to know. Sam's stomach tightened. What is it? Word has spread beyond Silver Creek. Hank Dawson has been talking to everyone who will listen. He's telling people you're harboring an Apache. Whitmore's voice dropped. He's also been in contact with some men from back east, businessmen, land speculators. What's that got to do with me? Your ranch sits on the only reliable water source for 20 miles, McAllister. That stream that runs through your property. In a drought like this, it's worth more than gold. Whitmore's hands were trembling again. These men, they're not like the folks in Silver Creek. They don't lynch people in the open. They destroy them quietly, legally, through paperwork and lawyers and judges they've bought. Sam felt cold despite the heat. Are you saying someone's coming for my land? I'm saying someone's been watching you for a long time, and now they have the perfect excuse to move against you. The whole territory thinks you're an Indian sympathizer. The courts will rule against you before you ever set foot in front of a judge. Nolan spoke suddenly, her voice still rough but clear. Then I should go, now, before I bring more trouble to this house. No. Sam's response was immediate. You're not strong enough. You wouldn't make it 3 days out there alone. I have survived worse. Maybe, but you don't have to prove it to me. Whitmore looked between them, something like admiration crossing his weathered face. You're a stubborn man, McAllister. So I've been told. The doctor gathered his bag and moved toward the door. At the threshold he paused. My son Thomas is studying law back east, Philadelphia. He's a good boy, but he's impressionable, easily swayed by powerful men with money. Whitmore's voice was heavy with something Sam couldn't quite identify. If something happens to me, if I'm not around to guide him, I worry about who he might become. Why are you telling me this? Because in 20 years, if the worst comes to pass, he might be the one standing against you. And you'll need to know that he wasn't always that way. Whitmore put on his hat. He was kind once, remember that. He rode away into the morning light, leaving Sam standing in the doorway, with a chill running down his spine. Two weeks later, Nayland was strong enough to travel. Sam had found her outside at dawn, standing by the corral, watching the sun rise over the mountains to the east. Her throat had healed. Her strength had returned. The fire in her eyes burned brighter than ever. Today, she said without turning around. Sam walked up beside her. You sure? My people will be searching for me. Every day I stay is a risk for both of us. I could ride with you. Make sure you get there safe. No. She finally looked at him. You have already given me more than I can repay. I will not take your safety as well. Sam nodded slowly. He'd known this moment was coming. From his pocket, he pulled a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a hunting knife with a bone handle, simple but sharp, well balanced. Belonged to my father, he said, holding it out to her. He gave it to me before he died. Said a man should always have something to protect himself with. Nolan stared at the knife. I cannot take this. You ain't taking it. I'm giving it. He pressed it into her hands. "You saved yourself, Nayland. I just cut the rope. Whatever comes next, wherever you go, you remember that. You saved yourself." Nayland's fingers closed around the bone handle. For the first time since he'd found her hanging from that tree, something softened in her face. Not quite a smile, but close. So close. "I will not forget this, Samuel McAllister," she said quietly. "I will not forget what you did. And one day, when you need help, when the darkness closes in, and there is no one left to stand with you, I will come back." That's a big promise for a 16-year-old girl to make. "I am Apache." Her chin lifted. "We keep our promises." She took the horse Sam had prepared for her, a young mare named Shadow, and swung into the saddle with a grace that belied her weeks of injury. Sam watched her ride toward the eastern mountains until she was nothing but a speck against the vast burning sky. Then she was gone. And Sam was alone again, standing in the middle of his 280 acres, wondering if he'd done something noble or something foolish. In 20 years, he would have his answer. The years passed like water through a cracked vessel, slowly at first, then all at once. Sam worked his land, expanded his herd, built a proper barn, then a second cabin for the hands he occasionally hired. Silver Creek continued to treat him as an outcast, but he found ways to survive. Sold his cattle through brokers in Santa Fe. Traded with traveling merchants who didn't know or didn't care about his reputation. The Dr. Whitmore died in the winter of 1871. Pneumonia, they said. Sam attended the funeral, standing alone at the back of the cemetery while the whole town turned to stare. As the coffin was lowered into the frozen ground, Sam noticed a young man near the front of the crowd. Tall, well-dressed, with the soft hands of someone who'd never worked a day of manual labor in his life. Thomas Whitmore, the doctor's son, home from Philadelphia for the burial. Their eyes met across the open grave. Thomas looked away first. 1885. 20 years since the hanging tree. Sam McAllister was 45 years old now, and the world had changed in ways he never could have imagined. The railroad had come through New Mexico, bringing with it new people, new money, and new enemies. His ranch had grown to nearly 300 acres, but the drought of the past 3 years had hit him hard. The stream that ran through his property, the same stream that Dr. Whitmore had warned him about, had slowed to a trickle. And now, finally, they had come for him. Sam stood on his porch watching the dust cloud approach from the direction of Silver Creek. 2 riders, a carriage behind them. His hand rested on the rifle beside the door. The carriage pulled to a stop just outside his fence. The door opened, and a man stepped out, round, well-fed, dressed in a black coat that must have cost more than everything Sam owned combined. "Mr. McAllister." The man's voice was smooth as oil. "My name is Cornelius Hartwell. I believe we have business to discuss." Behind Hartwell, still sitting in the carriage, Sam could see a second figure. Younger. Nervous. Thomas Whitmore. 20 years. 20 years of silence. 20 years of building. 20 years of wondering if the girl he saved had kept her promise or forgotten him entirely. And now, at last, the storm had arrived. "I don't know any Cornelius Hartwell," Sam said evenly. "And I don't have business with strangers." "Oh, but you do." Hartwell smiled, a cold, practiced thing. "You see, I've recently acquired certain documents that suggest you owe a significant debt. A debt secured against this very land. I don't owe anyone a cent. The papers say otherwise." Hartwell pulled a folder from inside his coat. "And I have witnesses who will testify to their authenticity, including, I should mention, the very respectable attorney Thomas Whitmore, son of your late friend the doctor." Sam's eyes moved to Thomas. The young man wouldn't meet his gaze. "You have 30 days, Mr. McAllister," Hartwell continued. 30 days to pay what you owe, or this land, all of it, becomes mine." He climbed back into the carriage. "I trust you'll make the right decision, for everyone's sake." The carriage rolled away, leaving Sam standing alone in the fading light. 30 days. 30 days to save everything he'd built. And somewhere out there, beyond the mountains, was a woman who had once promised to return when the darkness closed in. Sam looked to the east. "I could use that help now, Nalin," he whispered to the empty sky. "I could really use that help now." The wind offered no answer. But somewhere in the vast, wild heart of the Apache homeland, a woman with a scar around her throat lifted her head. She had felt something shift in the air. Something was calling her home. The dust from Hartwell's carriage had barely settled when Sam walked back inside his cabin and sat down at the kitchen table. His hands were steady, but something cold had taken root in his chest. 30 days. He pulled open the drawer beside the stove and took out a small wooden box. Inside were all the papers that mattered: the deed to his land, signed and stamped by the territorial office in Santa Fe. Receipts for every purchase he'd ever made. Records of cattle sales going back 15 years. Not a single debt among them. Sam had never borrowed money from anyone, not once in his entire life. His father had taught him that much before the whiskey took him. A man who owes is a man who kneels. So how did Cornelius Hartwell have papers saying otherwise? The answer came to him slowly, like poison seeping through water. Thomas Whitmore, the doctor's son. The boy who'd stood at his father's grave with soft hands and downcast eyes. The man who now sat in Hartwell's carriage, too ashamed to meet Sam's gaze. Thomas had access to his father's records. All those years of house calls, of treating Sam for fevers and injuries, of sitting at this very table, drinking coffee and talking about the weather. Dr. Whitmore had known everything about Sam's finances. What he owned, what he owed, what he was worth. And now his son was using that knowledge as a weapon. Sam closed the wooden box and set it back in the drawer. He needed help, real help, the kind that couldn't be bought or intimidated. But who in Silver Creek would stand with him now? The next morning, Sam rode into town for the first time in 3 months. The main street was busier than he remembered. New buildings had gone up: a bank, a telegraph office, a hotel with actual glass windows. The railroad had brought prosperity to Silver Creek, but it had also brought men like Cornelius Hartwell. Men who saw land not as something to work, but as something to own. Sam hitched Copper outside the sheriff's office and pushed through the door. Emmett Crawford sat behind a cluttered desk, his silver hair catching the light from the window. He was older now, 60 if he was a day, but his eyes were still sharp, still measuring. "McAllister." Crawford didn't stand. "Been a while." "Sheriff, heard you had some visitors yesterday." "Word travels fast." "It does when Cornelius Hartwell's involved." Crawford leaned back in his chair. "That man's been buying up property all across the territory. Ranches, mines, water rights. Always legal, always clean, at least on paper." Sam pulled a chair up to the desk and sat down heavily. "They're saying I owe money, Sheriff. Money I never borrowed. They've got documents, forged documents, and they're planning to use them to take my land." Crawford was quiet for a long moment. "Can you prove they're forged?" "I've got my deed, my receipts, everything in order." "That's not what I asked." Crawford's voice was gentle but firm. "Can you prove their documents are false, in a court of law? In front of a judge who may or may not be on Hartwell's payroll?" Sam felt the cold in his chest spread a little further. "I don't know." Crawford nodded slowly. "That's the problem with men like Hartwell. They don't break the law, they bend it. They find the weak spots, the cracks, and they pour themselves through like water." He paused. "How many days did he give you?" 30. "That's not much time." "No, it ain't." Crawford stood and walked to the window, his limp more pronounced than Sam remembered. "An old war wound," people said. "Shiloh, maybe, or Antietam." "I can't help you fight him in court, McAllister. That's not my jurisdiction. But I can promise you this: if Hartwell tries anything outside the law, if he sends men to your ranch with guns instead of papers, I'll be there." "That's something." "It's all I can offer." Crawford turned back to face him. "But there might be someone else who can help. Someone who knows Hartwell's methods better than anyone." "Who?" "Her name's Nayland." Sam's heart stopped. What did you say? Crawford's expression didn't change. About 3 months ago, a woman came through Silver Creek. Apache, but dressed like she'd spent time among white folks. Spoke perfect English. Asked a lot of questions about land transfers, property disputes, families who'd lost their homes. Sam could barely breathe. Did she leave a name? She left a message. Crawford pulled a folded piece of paper from his desk drawer. Said to give this to Samuel McAllister if he ever came looking for help. Sam took the paper with trembling hands. The note was short, just 2 lines written in careful, precise handwriting. When the darkness comes, look to the eastern mountains. I keep my promises. Sam read it again, and again. 20 years. 20 years, and she hadn't forgotten. You know this woman? Crawford asked. Sam folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket. I saved her life once. Long time ago. Must have made quite an impression. I reckon it did. Sam stood and extended his hand. Crawford took it. Thank you, Sheriff, for everything. Don't thank me yet. You've got a hard road ahead. Sam walked out into the bright morning sun, his mind racing. The eastern mountains. That's where she'd gone 20 years ago. That's where her people lived. If the note was real, if Nayland was really out there, really watching, then maybe, just maybe, he had a chance. But the mountains were 3 days' ride, and he only had 30 days to save his land. Every hour counted. Sam untied Copper and swung into the saddle. He was about to turn toward the eastern road when a voice stopped him cold. Mr. McAllister. Thomas Whitmore stood on the boardwalk outside the bank, his face pale, his hands clutching a leather satchel like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Sam didn't move. Mr. McAllister, please. I need to talk to you. I don't have anything to say to you, Whitmore. I know you don't. But please. Thomas took a step closer, his voice dropping. There are things you don't understand. Things about Hartwell, about what he's planning. I understand plenty. You sold me out. You took everything your father knew about me and handed it to that snake so he could steal my land. Thomas flinched, like he'd been struck. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Thomas looked around nervously. A few townspeople had stopped to watch their faces, curious and hungry for gossip. Not here, Thomas said. Please, meet me tonight. The old mill outside town, the one by the creek. 9 o'clock. I'll explain everything. Why should I trust you? You shouldn't. Thomas's voice cracked. But my father trusted you. And I'm trying. I'm trying to be the man he wanted me to be. Sam stared at him for a long moment. There was something in Thomas's eyes. Not cunning, not deception. Something that looked almost like desperation. 9 o'clock, Sam said finally. You're late by 1 minute. I'm gone. He rode away without looking back. The old mill sat beside what had once been a thriving creek, but was now little more than a muddy trickle. 20 years ago, it had ground flour for half the territory. Now, it was just rotting wood and rusted machinery, forgotten by everyone except those who needed a place to hide. Sam arrived early. He always arrived early. He tied Copper to a post behind the mill and made his way inside, his hand resting on the colt at his hip. The building smelled of decay and animal droppings, but the walls were solid enough to block the wind. He found a spot in the shadows where he could see the door and settled in to wait. Thomas arrived exactly at 9. The young lawyer stepped through the doorway, a lantern in one hand, the other raised in a gesture of peace. I'm here. I'm alone. So you are. Thomas jumped at the sound of Sam's voice coming from the darkness. He raised the lantern higher, squinting. May I come closer? Slowly. Thomas approached until he was standing in a pool of lantern light, his shadow stretching long across the dirt floor. Up close, Sam could see how tired he looked. Dark circles under his eyes, a tremor in his hands. Thank you for coming, Thomas said. Start talking. Thomas set the lantern on an old barrel and ran his hands through his hair. Cornelius Hartwell approached me 6 months ago. He said he was looking for a lawyer to help him with some property acquisitions. It seemed legitimate at first, buying land from willing sellers, helping families relocate who wanted to move closer to the railroad. I thought I was doing good work. But then I started noticing things. Discrepancies in the paperwork. Signatures that didn't match. Families who claimed they never agreed to sell, but somehow there were documents saying they had. Thomas's voice grew bitter. By the time I understood what was really happening, I was in too deep. Hartwell had copies of everything I'd touched. If I went to the authorities, he'd destroy me, make it look like I was the mastermind, and he was just an innocent investor who'd been deceived. Sam stepped out of the shadows. That's a sad story, Whitmore, but it doesn't explain why you're helping him steal my land. Thomas looked at the ground. He has something on me, something worse than the forged documents. What? My father's journals. Thomas's voice was barely a whisper. When he died, I inherited all his papers, his medical records, his personal writings, everything. I didn't read them for years. I couldn't bear to. But when I finally did, he trailed off. What was in them? Sam asked. Everything, every secret he ever kept, every patient he ever treated. Thomas looked up and his eyes were wet, including a detailed account of how he helped you hide an Apache girl in the summer of 1865. Names, dates, descriptions. Everything the territorial authorities would need to charge you and my father's memory with harboring an enemy combatant. Sam felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Your father wrote that down. He wrote everything down. He was a scientist at heart. He believed in documentation and truth, in preserving the record of what really happened. Thomas laughed bitterly. He never imagined someone like Hartwell would get his hands on it. How did Hartwell find out? I don't know. But he showed me copies 2 months ago. Told me that if I didn't cooperate, if I didn't help him acquire your land, he'd release the journals to every newspaper in the territory. Your name would be destroyed. My father's legacy would be ruined, and I'd be disbarred, probably imprisoned. Sam was quiet for a long time. He wanted to hate Thomas Whitmore, wanted to see him as nothing but a coward and a traitor. But looking at the broken young man standing before him, all Sam could see was someone who'd gotten in over his head. Someone who'd made a deal with the devil and didn't know how to get out. Just like his father had warned. What do you want from me? Sam asked finally. Thomas straightened. I want to help you beat him. How? By telling you everything I know about his operation. Every family he's cheated. Every document he's forged. Every judge and lawman he's bribed. Thomas's voice grew stronger. Hartwell thinks he's untouchable because no one's ever had the full picture. But I have it. All of it. And I'm willing to share it with you if you'll give me a chance to make things right. Sam studied him carefully. And what do you get out of this? Redemption. Thomas smiled sadly. My father believed in second chances, Mr. McAllister. He proved that when he helped you save that girl. I'm asking you to give me the same chance he gave you. The mill creaked around them, old wood settling in the cold night air. Sam thought about the girl he'd cut down from the oak tree, about the doctor who'd risked his reputation to bring medicine, about the note in his pocket promising help from the eastern mountains. Second chances. Maybe that's what this whole story was about. All right, Sam said. Tell me everything. They talked until nearly midnight. Thomas laid out the full scope of Hartwell's operation. 18 families across the territory who'd lost their land through the same combination of forged documents and corrupted courts. He explained how Hartwell had built relationships with key officials, how he used intimidation when paperwork failed, how he'd destroyed anyone who tried to stand against him. But Thomas had been keeping records of his own, copies of the real signatures alongside the forgeries, testimonies from families who'd been cheated, a paper trail that in the right hands could bring Hartwell's empire crashing down. The problem is getting it in front of someone who'll actually listen, Thomas said. Every judge in this territory owes Hartwell favors. Every lawman knows which side his bread is buttered on. What about federal authorities? Thomas shook his head. They won't act without overwhelming evidence. Right now, all I have is documentation. What we need is witnesses. People willing to testify on the record about what Hartwell did to them. Where do we find them? That's the thing, most of them have scattered, left the territory entirely. But there's one family. Thomas hesitated. The Hendersons. They lost their ranch about 2 years ago, same tactics Hartwell's using on you. Last I heard, they were living in Santa Fe, working as day laborers. And you think they'd be willing to talk? I think they'd be willing to do more than talk. James Henderson swore he'd see Hartwell hang for what he did, but he didn't have the evidence to back it up. With my documents and his testimony, we might have a case. We might have more than a case. We might have a movement. Sam stood and walked to the window. Through the gaps in the rotted wood, he could see the stars scattered across the sky like distant promises. 18 families. 18 families just like him ground under Hartwell's heel. If he could bring them together, if he could unite all those voices, maybe they'd have a chance. Not just to save his ranch, but to bring down the man who'd been preying on honest people for years. There's something else, Sam said without turning around. What? 20 years ago when I saved that Apache girl, her name was Nalin, she made me a promise. Said she'd come back if I ever needed help. Thomas was silent. I got a message from her through Sheriff Crawford. She's been watching Hartwell too, gathering information of her own. And she's out there somewhere in the eastern mountains waiting. You think she can help? Sam turned back to face him. I think she's been preparing for this moment for longer than either of us know. The question is whether we can get word to her in time. Thomas stood. Then we'd better move fast. 29 days isn't much time to build an army. No, it ain't. They shook hands in the darkness of the old mill, the rancher and the lawyer, the man who'd saved a life, and the man trying to redeem himself. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was a start. The next morning, Sam rode east. He packed light bedroll canteen rifle, enough food for 3 days. If Nalin was where he thought she was, he'd find her before the supplies ran out. If she wasn't, well, he'd deal with that when the time came. The first day took him through familiar territory. The scrublands around Silver Creek, the rocky mesas that marked the edge of his property, the dried-up creek bed that had once been the lifeblood of his ranch. Everywhere he looked, he saw the effects of the drought. Cattle bones bleaching in the sun. Abandoned homesteads with their doors hanging open. The land itself seemed to be dying, cracking apart under the weight of too much sun and not enough rain. By the second day, the terrain grew rougher. The mesas gave way to foothills, and the foothills rose steadily toward the dark peaks of the Chiricahua Mountains. This was Apache territory, had been for generations before the white man came, and still was, despite all the government's efforts to claim otherwise. Sam kept his rifle close and his eyes open. On the evening of the second day, he made camp in a narrow canyon that offered shelter from the wind. He built a small fire more for comfort than warmth and sat staring into the flames. What was he doing out here? Chasing a 20-year-old promise made by a 16-year-old girl, looking for help from a people who had every reason to hate him and everything he represented. The fire crackled softly. Sam thought about his father, drunk, broken, unable to save Sam's mother when the fever took her. He thought about all the years he'd spent building his ranch, trying to create something solid and real in a world that seemed determined to tear everything apart. He thought about Nalin. The way she'd looked at him that first night, her eyes dark and fierce despite everything she'd been through. The way she'd said his name when she rode away Samuel McAllister, like it was something she was carving into her memory. I will not forget what you did. I hope not, Sam whispered to the darkness. I surely hope not. He was almost asleep when he heard it. The soft crunch of footsteps on gravel. More than one person, moving carefully, deliberately, surrounding his position. Sam's hand found his rifle. I wouldn't do that if I were you. The voice came from somewhere above him, a woman's voice, strong and clear. Sam looked up. Standing on the rim of the canyon, silhouetted against the stars, was a figure he would have recognized anywhere. Nalin. She was no longer the frightened girl he'd cut down from an oak tree. The woman looking down at him was tall and straight, dressed in Apache warrior garb, leather and beadwork, and colors that seemed to absorb the moonlight. Her hair still long and black as midnight was pulled back from her face, revealing the sharp angles of her cheekbones and the fierce intelligence in her eyes. But it was the scar around her throat that made Sam's breath catch. Even after 20 years, he could see it, a thin white line where the rope had burned into her skin. Samuel McAllister. Her voice hadn't changed. Still that same low, steady tone that had asked him why he saved her all those years ago. "You took your time coming." Sam set down the rifle and stood slowly. "I didn't know where to find you." "I know. That's why I found you instead." She made a gesture, and suddenly the canyon was full of people, warriors emerging from the shadows, like they'd been born from the rock itself. 20 at least, maybe more. They moved without sound, their eyes reflecting the dying firelight. Sam's heart hammered in his chest. "Easy," Nalin said, and he didn't know if she was talking to him or to her people. "This man saved my life. Whatever happens tonight, we will not harm him." She descended from the rim with the grace of someone who'd spent years moving through these mountains. When she reached the canyon floor, she stopped a few feet from Sam, studying his face with an intensity that made him feel like she was reading every thought he'd ever had. "You look older," she said finally. "I am older. So am I." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "But here we are." "Here we are?" Nalin turned and spoke to her warriors in Apache, rapid, fluid words that Sam couldn't follow. Several of them disappeared back into the darkness. Others began building up the fire, pulling out food and water from packs Sam hadn't noticed. Within minutes, the cold canyon had been transformed into something that felt almost like a home. Nalin sat down across the fire from Sam and studied him with those dark, unreadable eyes. "Tell me about Cornelius Hartwell." Sam blinked. "You know about him." "I know everything about him. I have been tracking that man for 2 years, learning his methods, documenting his crimes." Her voice hardened. 18 families, Samuel. 18 families destroyed by his greed. Their children hungry, their elders dying without shelter. And no one, not one person in your great American system of justice has lifted a finger to stop him. I didn't know. You didn't want to know. None of your people did. As long as it was happening to others, to Mexicans, to poor white settlers, to anyone without power, it was easy to look away. Her eyes met his. But now it's happening to you. And suddenly, you're ready to fight. The words hit Sam like stones. "You're right," he said quietly. I looked away. For years I kept my head down, stayed out of trouble, told myself it wasn't my business. He paused. "But I'm here now. I'm asking for your help. Not because I deserve it, because I don't. But because you're the only chance I've got." Nalin was silent for a long moment. "Do you remember what I said to you the day I left your ranch?" "Every word." "Tell me." Sam cleared his throat. "You said that some spirits walk between worlds, that they follow no law but their own. You asked me if I was dangerous. And what did you say?" "I said I didn't know." Nalin nodded slowly. "I know now. I have watched you from a distance for many years, Samuel McAllister. I have seen how you treat your land, your animals, the few people who still do business with you. I have seen you offer water to travelers who had nothing to give in return. I have seen you bury dead Apache warriors who were left to rot by your own army." Sam looked up sharply. He'd done that, yes, found bodies in the desert and given them proper burials because it seemed like the right thing to do. He hadn't known anyone was watching. "You are not dangerous," Nalin continued. "You are something far more rare. You are good. Truly good, in a world that punishes goodness." She reached across the fire and took his hand. "That is why I will help you." Her grip was strong, calloused, the hand of someone who had worked and fought and survived. "But I am not doing this just for you," she said. "I am doing this for every family Hartwell has destroyed. I am doing this for my people who have watched your kind steal and kill and call it progress. And I am doing this because 20 years ago, a young cowboy cut me down from a rope and asked nothing in return." She released his hand. "In the morning we ride. I have already sent word to the families who lost their land. They will meet us at your ranch in 10 days, every one of them who is willing to stand and fight. With their testimony and the evidence I have gathered, we will destroy Cornelius Hartwell." Sam felt something shift in his chest. The cold that had taken root there began to thaw. "Why didn't you come sooner if you've been watching all this time?" "Because I was waiting for you to ask." Nolan's eyes met his. "You gave me a gift 20 years ago, Samuel. Not just my life, my dignity. You treated me as a person, not as a savage to be pitied or feared. You let me choose when to leave. I wanted to give you the same gift, the choice to stand or run. I'm standing. I know, that's why I'm here." The fire crackled between them, sending sparks up into the vast darkness of the desert sky. Around them, Nalan's warriors settled into their positions, some sleeping, others keeping watch, all of them ready for whatever came next. Sam looked at the woman across the fire and saw not just the girl he'd saved, but everything she'd become. A leader, a warrior, a bridge between two worlds that had been at war for generations. "Thank you," he said softly. Nolan shook her head. "Don't thank me yet. The hardest part is still ahead." She lay down near the fire, her hand resting on the knife at her belt, the same knife Sam had given her 20 years ago, he realized with a start. She'd kept it. All this time. Sam lay back and stared up at the stars, his mind racing with everything that was about to happen. 18 families. A corrupt businessman. A broken lawyer seeking redemption. And an army of Apache warriors led by a woman he'd saved from a hanging tree. It was impossible. All of it was impossible. But then again, so was cutting down a dying girl and changing the course of 2 lives forever. Sam closed his eyes. For the first time in months, he slept without dreaming. The ride back to the ranch took 2 days. They traveled fast. Nalan's warriors moving through the territory with a knowledge of the land that made Sam feel like a stranger in his own home. They knew every water source, every hidden path, every place where they could rest without being seen. On the second night, camped in a shallow wash about 10 miles from Silver Creek, Nalan finally told Sam the full story of what she'd been doing for the past 20 years. After leaving his ranch, she'd made it back to her people. But the world she returned to was not the world she'd left. The wars were ending not through victory, but through exhaustion. The Apache bands were being pushed onto reservations, their lands taken, their way of life destroyed. Nalan had watched her people suffer, and she had decided to learn everything she could about the world that was destroying them. She'd spent time with a Quaker family in Santa Fe, learning to read and write English. She'd studied law, history, politics. She'd traveled through the territory listening to stories of families who'd lost everything to men like Hartwell. And slowly, carefully, she'd built a network. Apache warriors who trusted her leadership. White settlers who'd been wronged and wanted justice. Mexican families who remembered the old ways and were willing to fight for their land. "You've been building an army," Sam said quietly. "I've been building a coalition," Nalan corrected. "An army fights with weapons. A coalition fights with truth." "And what happens when truth isn't enough?" Nalan's eyes glinted in the firelight. "Then we have weapons too." They reached Sam's ranch on the morning of the 3rd day. The land looked worse than Sam remembered, the grass brown and brittle, the cattle thin and listless, the stream reduced to a muddy trickle. But it was still his. Still the place he'd built with his own hands. And now somehow it had become the center of something much bigger. Thomas Whitmore was waiting on the porch. He stood when he saw them approaching, his face going pale at the sight of 20 Apache warriors riding toward him. "Easy," Sam called out. "They're friends. Thomas didn't look convinced, but he didn't run either. That was something. Nalin dismounted and walked toward him with the confidence of someone who feared nothing. "You're the lawyer," she said. It wasn't a question. Thomas swallowed hard. "I am. Show me what you have." For the next 3 hours, they spread documents across Sam's kitchen table. Thomas's records of Hartwell's crimes, Nalin's evidence of forged signatures and bribed officials' testimonies from families scattered across the territory. When they were finished, the table looked like a battlefield of paper and ink. "This is extraordinary," Thomas said, staring at Nalin's contribution. "How did you get all this?" "I listened. I watched. I remembered." Nalin's voice was flat. "Your people have a saying, knowledge is power. My people have a different saying. Truth is a weapon that never dulls." Thomas looked at her with something like awe. "If we can get this in front of a federal judge?" "We can do more than that." Nalin pulled out a final document, a letter with an official seal. "I have been in contact with a federal attorney in Washington, a man named Harrison Cole. He has been investigating land fraud in the territories for 3 years, but he's never had enough evidence to act." She set the letter on the table. "Until now." Sam read the letter slowly. It confirmed everything Nalin had said. Cole was interested. Cole was willing to come to New Mexico. Cole had the authority to overrule any local judge Hartwell might have in his pocket. But there was a condition. "He needs witnesses," Sam said. "Living, breathing people willing to testify in person." "Which is why I sent runners to every family on the list," Nalin replied. "They will be here within the week, all of them." Thomas shook his head in disbelief. "You planned all this, before you even knew Sam would come looking for you." "I planned for every possibility, including the one where he never came at all." Nalin looked at Sam. "But I hoped. Every day for 20 years I hoped." The room fell silent. Outside, the sun was setting over the parched land, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. 18 families. A federal attorney. Enough evidence to bury Cornelius Hartwell 10 times over. For the first time since this nightmare began, Sam allowed himself to believe they might actually win. But he knew Hartwell well enough by now to know that the man wouldn't go down without a fight. Whatever came next, it wasn't going to be easy. And somewhere out there, riding toward Silver Creek, with his lawyers and his hired guns and his endless supply of forged documents, Cornelius Hartwell was getting ready to make his final play. The battle for Sam's land and for the soul of the territory was about to begin. The first family arrived on the 7th day. James Henderson rode up to Sam's ranch just after dawn, his wife Martha beside him on a wagon that had seen better years. Their 3 children sat in the back, silent and watchful, their eyes carrying the weight of things no child should have to see. Sam met them at the gate. "Mr. Henderson." "McAllister." James climbed down from the wagon, his movements stiff from the long journey. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with hands that spoke of years of hard work. But there was something broken in his posture now, something that hadn't been there before Hartwell took everything he had. "I got the message," James said. "Didn't believe it at first, thought it was some kind of trick." "No trick." "So I see." James looked past Sam to where Nalin stood on the porch flanked by 2 of her warriors. His jaw tightened. "Didn't expect to see Apache here. She's the reason any of this is possible." James was quiet for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. "James Henderson. Lost my ranch 2 years ago to that snake Hartwell. If you've got a way to make him pay, I'm listening." Sam shook his hand. "Come inside. We've got a lot to talk about." Over the next 3 days they kept coming. The Rawlings family from Tucson, who'd lost their cattle operation when Hartwell forged a deed transfer and had them evicted at gunpoint. Old Miguel Fernandez and his sons, whose land grant from the Mexican government had been declared invalid by a judge Hartwell had bought. The widow Sarah Chen, whose husband had died of a heart attack the day after Hartwell's men showed up with papers claiming their general store. 18 families, just as Nayland had promised. They came in wagons and on horseback. They came carrying documents and memories and rage that had been building for years. They came because someone had finally given them hope that justice might be possible. And they came to Sam McAllister's ranch, the last piece of land Hartwell hadn't managed to steal. On the 10th day, with all 18 families gathered in Sam's barn, Nayland stood before them and laid out the plan. Federal Attorney Harrison Cole arrives in Silver Creek in 4 days, she said. He has authority from Washington to investigate land fraud in the territory. But authority means nothing without evidence, and evidence means nothing without witnesses willing to speak. She looked around the room at the faces of people who had lost everything. I know what I'm asking. I know the risk. Hartwell has power here. He has money, he has guns, he has men in positions of authority who will do whatever he tells them. Standing against him means putting yourselves in danger. It means putting your families in danger. She paused. But staying silent means letting him win. It means watching him do to others what he did to you. It means your children growing up believing that evil triumphs because good people are too afraid to speak. The barn was silent. Then James Henderson stood up. I've been afraid for 2 years, he said, his voice rough. Afraid to speak, afraid to fight, afraid to even say that man's name out loud. And where did it get me? Sleeping in a boarding house in Santa Fe, working as a day laborer on land I used to own. He looked at his wife, his children. I'm done being afraid. Whatever happens, I'm done. One by one, the others rose. Miguel Fernandez, Sarah Chen, the Rawlings brothers. Every family that had come standing together in that dusty barn, choosing courage over silence. Sam felt something shift in his chest. Something that had been frozen for a long time beginning to thaw. All right then, Nayland said. Let's get to work. The next 4 days were a blur of preparation. Thomas Whitmore organized the legal documentation, creating a comprehensive file that detailed every crime Hartwell had committed. Nayland's warriors maintained a perimeter around the ranch, watching for any sign of Hartwell's men. The families practiced their testimonies, going over their stories again and again, until every detail was clear. Sam found himself doing something he hadn't done in years leading. He assigned tasks, settled disputes, made decisions. When the Rawlings brothers got into a shouting match with Miguel Fernandez over whose testimony should come first, Sam stepped between them. We're not enemies here, he said firmly. Hartwell is the enemy. Every argument we have with each other makes him stronger. Understand? The brothers nodded grudgingly. Miguel spat on the ground but said nothing more. It wasn't perfect, but it was working. On the 3rd night, Sam found Nayland standing alone by the old oak tree at the edge of his property, the same tree where everything had begun. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. Couldn't sleep, he asked. I never sleep well before a battle. Sam stood beside her, looking up at the branches that had once held a rope around her neck. You kept coming back here, he said. When you were healing at my cabin, I'd find you sitting under this tree just staring at it. I was trying to understand. Understand what? Nayland was quiet for a long moment. In my culture, we believe that the places where we almost die become sacred. They hold a piece of our spirit forever. When I sit beneath this tree, I can feel the girl I used to be. The one who was terrified, who couldn't breathe, who thought she was going to die alone, surrounded by people who hated her. She touched the bark with her fingertips. But I can also feel the moment everything changed. The gunshot, the rope falling, your arms catching me before I hit the ground. She looked at Sam. You didn't just save my life that day. You showed me that not everyone in your world was my enemy. That changed everything about how I saw the future. Sam didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. After this is over, Nayland continued, I want to do something with this tree. Build something here. A school, maybe. A place where children from both our peoples can learn together. A school under a hanging tree? A school under a tree of second chances. Nolan smiled faintly. Sometimes the places of our greatest pain become the places of our greatest hope, if we let them. Sam thought about that for a long time. I'd like that, he said finally. I'd like that a lot. They stood together in the darkness, the woman and the man who had saved her looking up at the branches that had once meant death and now might mean something else entirely. The morning of the 14th day dawned hot and still. Federal Attorney Harrison Cole arrived in Silver Creek on the 9 o'clock stagecoach, accompanied by 2 federal marshals. He was a small man, unremarkable in appearance, with wire-rimmed spectacles and a perpetual frown. But his eyes were sharp, and when he spoke, people listened. Sheriff Crawford met him at the station and escorted him to the courthouse, where a makeshift hearing room had been prepared. Word had spread through the territory, and people had come from miles around to witness what promised to be the trial of the decade. Cornelius Hartwell was already there. He sat at the defendant's table with his lawyers, 3 of them all imported from back east, looking as calm and confident as ever. When Sam walked in with Nayland and Thomas Hartwell's eyes flickered with something that might have been surprise, but only for a moment. "Mr. McAllister," Hartwell said smoothly, "I see you've brought quite the entourage, including some colorful company." His gaze lingered on Nayland with undisguised contempt. Nolan didn't react, didn't blink, just walked past him like he was furniture. Attorney Cole took his place at the front of the room and called the hearing to order. "This is a preliminary investigation into allegations of land fraud, document forgery, and conspiracy to deprive citizens of their property," Cole announced. "Mr. Hartwell, you are not on trial today. But I have the authority to recommend criminal charges based on what I hear. I suggest you take this seriously." Hartwell's lead lawyer stood. "My client maintains his complete innocence. These allegations are nothing but the desperate inventions of disgruntled settlers who failed to meet their financial obligations." "Then he should have no problem addressing the evidence," Cole replied. "We'll begin with the testimony." One by one they came forward. James Henderson told his story first, how Hartwell's men had shown up with papers claiming he owed money he'd never borrowed, how the local judge had ruled against him without even looking at his evidence, how he'd been given 24 hours to vacate the property his family had worked for 3 generations. Sarah Chen spoke next, her voice trembling but clear. She described how her husband had begged the sheriff for help, how he'd been told there was nothing anyone could do, how he'd collapsed in their doorway the morning they were evicted and died in her arms. Miguel Fernandez presented his land grant from the Mexican government, a document older than anyone in the room, and explained how Hartwell's lawyers had convinced a judge it was invalid based on a technicality that didn't exist in any law book. Thomas Whitmore testified about the forged signatures he'd witnessed, the bribes he'd seen change hands, the systematic destruction of anyone who stood in Hartwell's way. And then Nayland took the stand. The room went quiet. She walked to the front with the same calm purpose she'd shown leading her warriors through the desert. When she sat down, her eyes found Hartwell's and held them. "State your name for the record," Cole said. "My name is Nayland. In your language it means Maiden of the Dawn. I am Chiricahua Apache." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "And what is your connection to this case?" Nayland reached into the leather pouch at her side and withdrew a thick stack of documents. "For the past 2 years, I have been investigating Cornelius Hartwell. I have gathered evidence of his crimes from sources across the territory, court records, bank statements, correspondence between Mr. Hartwell and various officials." She set the documents on the table. "This evidence proves that Mr. Hartwell did not merely take advantage of legal loopholes. He manufactured them. He forged signatures, created fictitious debts, and bribed judges to rule in his favor. The documents I have obtained include his own handwriting directing his associates to destroy evidence and intimidate witnesses." Hartwell's lawyers erupted in objections. Cole silenced them with a look. "How did you obtain these documents?" he asked Nayland. "Through patience, through persistence, and through the help of people Mr. Hartwell believed too frightened to speak." She turned to face the crowd. The families who had come to testify, the townspeople who had come to watch, the reporters who had traveled from as far as Santa Fe. 20 years ago, I was a girl of 16. I was caught stealing eggs to survive, and the good citizens of this town decided that the appropriate punishment was to hang me from a tree. Silence. I would have died that day. But one man, Samuel McAllister, risked everything to cut me down. He didn't know me. He owed me nothing. But he saw injustice happening, and he refused to look away. She pointed at Hartwell. That is the difference between men like Samuel McAllister and men like Cornelius Hartwell. One acts because it is right. The other acts because he can. Hartwell rose to his feet, his composure finally cracking. This is absurd. I will not sit here and be lectured by a savage who— Sit down, Mr. Hartwell. Cole's voice was ice. She has no standing in an American court. Her testimony is worthless. Her testimony is corroborated by documentation. Cole held up the papers Nayland had provided. Documentation that includes your signature on letters directing the destruction of evidence. Documentation that includes sworn statements from men you employed. Documentation that, quite frankly, is more compelling than anything your lawyers have presented. Hartwell's face went pale. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, Sam saw fear in the man's eyes. Real fear. The hearing continued for another 3 hours. More witnesses, more documents, more evidence piling up like stones on a grave. By the time Cole called for a recess, even Hartwell's lawyers looked defeated. Sam stepped outside for air and found Sheriff Crawford leaning against the courthouse wall. "Hell of a thing," Crawford said. "It ain't over yet." "No, but it's close." Crawford looked at Sam with something like respect. "You did good, McAllister, bringing all these people together, giving them a voice. It wasn't me, it was Nolan. It was both of you." Crawford straightened. "Whatever happens next, remember that. You didn't do this alone." Sam nodded slowly. He was about to go back inside when he saw Thomas Whitmore hurrying toward him, his face pale. "We have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "Hartwell's men." Thomas was breathing hard. "I just got word from one of Nolan's warriors. There's a group of them, 10, maybe 12, riding toward your ranch, armed." Sam's blood went cold. "The families. The ones who didn't come to testify. The women and children." Thomas's voice cracked. "They're defenseless." Sam didn't think. He ran. He found Nayland at the back of the courthouse conferring with 2 of her warriors. When she saw his face, she knew immediately. "How many?" 10 or 12, riding hard for my ranch." "How long ago?" "Maybe an hour." Nayland turned to her warriors and spoke rapidly in Apache. They disappeared around the corner running. "We have horses behind the livery stable," she said. 6 of my best riders. It won't be enough, but it's what we have." "I'm coming with you." "I know." They ran together through the back streets of Silver Creek, past startled townspeople and barking dogs, until they reached the livery stable, where Nolan's warriors were already mounted. Sam swung onto Copper's back and drew his rifle. "How fast can we get there?" "Fast enough." Nayland's eyes were hard. "Or we die trying." They rode. The horses' hooves thundered against the dry earth, sending up clouds of red dust that hung in the still air like smoke. Sam pushed Copper harder than he'd ever pushed her, feeling the mare's muscles strain beneath him. It wasn't far. 10 miles, maybe 12. But 10 miles might as well be 1,000 when lives hung in the balance. They crested the final ridge, just as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Sam's ranch lay below them, the cabin, the barn, the corral where the remaining cattle huddled together in the heat. And in front of the cabin, a group of riders. Hartwell's men. They had the families surrounded. Women clutching children, old men with their hands raised, everyone herded into a tight circle in front of the porch. One of the riders, a big man with a black hat, was shouting something, waving a torch. They were going to burn it down. Everything Sam had built. Everyone who had trusted him. "No," Sam whispered. Then he raised his rifle and charged. The battle was brief and brutal. Nalen's warriors hit Hartwell's men from 3 directions at once, their war cries splitting the air like thunder. Sam rode straight for the big man with the torch firing as he went. The first shot took the torch from the man's hand. The second took him from his horse. Chaos erupted. Hartwell's men were hired guns used to intimidating farmers and scaring off settlers. They weren't prepared for trained Apache warriors who moved like shadows and fought like demons. Within minutes, half of them were down. The other half were trying to flee their horses, scattering in every direction as Nalen's warriors gave chase. Sam dismounted in front of the cabin, his rifle still raised. "Is everyone all right?" Martha Henderson emerged from behind a water trough, her children clutched against her chest. "We're alive," she said, her voice shaking. "Thanks to you." One by one, the others emerged from their hiding places, scared, shaken, but alive. All alive. Sam felt his knees go weak with relief. Nalen rode up beside him, blood on her cheek from a cut she hadn't seemed to notice. "It's done. 2 escaped, but the rest are either dead or captured. The ones who escaped will carry word back to Hartwell." Nalen's smile was fierce. "Let them. Let him know what happens when he threatens innocent people. Let him understand that we are not afraid." Sam looked around at the aftermath, the bodies of Hartwell's men scattered across his property, the families holding each other, the Apache warriors standing guard. This wasn't over. Hartwell would try again. He'd find another way, another angle, another attack. But for now, in this moment, they had won. "We need to get back to town," Sam said. "The hearing will continue without us for now. Cole has enough evidence to make his recommendation." Nalen touched his arm. "But you're right. We should return before Hartwell tries anything else." She turned to her warriors and gave instructions. Some would stay to guard the families. Others would ride with them back to Silver Creek. As Sam mounted Copper, he looked back at his cabin, battered, dusty, but still standing, still his. And now, thanks to the people who had gathered under his roof, it had become something more. A symbol, a rally point. The place where the tide began to turn. He rode toward Silver Creek with Nalen at his side, the setting sun painting the desert red behind them. The reckoning wasn't over. But Cornelius Hartwell was about to learn that the people he had wronged were done running. They were fighting back. And they were going to win. They rode back into Silver Creek just as darkness settled over the town. The streets were empty, but Sam could see faces in the windows, townspeople watching, waiting, trying to understand what was happening to the world they thought they knew. Word of the attack on his ranch had already spread. Word always spread fast in a place like this. Sheriff Crawford met them outside the courthouse, his face grim. "Heard there was trouble at your place." Hartwell sent men to burn it down. They didn't succeed. Crawford looked at the blood on Nalen's cheek, at the hard faces of the warriors riding behind them. "Anyone dead? Some of Hartwell's hired guns, none of ours." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Cole's been waiting for you. The hearing's been recessed, but he wants to finish tonight. Says he's seen enough to make his decision." Sam dismounted and handed Copper's reins to one of Nalen's warriors. "Where's Hartwell?" "Still inside. His lawyers tried to get him released, but Cole ordered him held until the hearing concludes." Crawford paused. "He's scared, McAllister. First time I've ever seen that man scared." "Good." Sam walked toward the courthouse with Nalen beside him. At the door she stopped. "Samuel." He turned. "Whatever happens in there," she said quietly, "remember that we have already won. Not just for you, not just for me, but for every family who lost everything to that man. Whatever the law decides, we gave them back their voices. No one can take that away." Sam looked at her, this woman who had been a dying girl 20 years ago, who had spent 2 decades preparing for this moment, who had crossed the divide between their peoples to stand beside him. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "I know." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "But you would have tried anyway. That's why I came back." They walked into the courthouse together. The hearing room was packed. Every seat was filled, and people stood 3 deep along the walls. The families who had testified sat in the front rows, their faces drawn with exhaustion and hope. Behind them, townspeople who had once turned their backs on Sam now watched with something like shame in their eyes. Cornelius Hartwell sat at the defendant's table, his lawyers flanking him like nervous sentries. The confident smile he'd worn that morning was gone. In its place was something hollow, something desperate. He looked like a man watching his empire crumble. Attorney Cole stood as Sam and Nalin entered. "Mr. McAllister, I'm glad you could rejoin us. I understand there was an incident at your property." "There was. It's been handled." "So I've heard." Cole's eyes flickered to Nalin. "I've also received word that the men responsible for the attack were in Mr. Hartwell's employ. Is that correct?" "It is." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Hartwell's lead lawyer jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, Mr. Cole, this is hearsay. My client had no knowledge of any attack. If some of his employees acted independently—" "Sit down, Mr. Whitfield." Cole's voice cut like a blade. "I've spent the past 6 hours reviewing the evidence presented in this hearing. I've listened to testimony from 18 separate families. I've examined documents that bear Mr. Hartwell's signature directing activities that are clearly illegal under federal law." He picked up a stack of papers from his desk. "I've also received a telegraph from my office in Washington. It seems that Mr. Hartwell's activities in New Mexico are not unique. Similar patterns of land fraud have been identified in Arizona, Colorado, and Kansas, all connected to companies he controls, all using the same methods." Hartwell's face went gray. "This is not simply a case of local corruption," Cole continued. "This is a systematic criminal enterprise spanning multiple territories, and as such, it falls under federal jurisdiction." He turned to face Hartwell directly. "Cornelius Hartwell, based on the evidence presented in this hearing, I am recommending that you be charged with 37 counts of fraud, 22 counts of forgery, 12 counts of conspiracy, and 4 counts of accessory to assault. These charges will be filed with the federal court in Santa Fe, and you will be held in custody until trial." The room erupted. People were shouting, crying, embracing each other. James Henderson had his arms around his wife, tears streaming down his face. Miguel Fernandez was on his knees, crossing himself and murmuring prayers in Spanish. Sam stood very still, trying to absorb what had just happened. It was over. After everything, after 20 years of waiting, months of fear, weeks of desperate planning, it was finally over. Then Hartwell stood up. His lawyers tried to stop him, but he shook them off. He walked to the center of the room, his eyes finding Sam's across the chaos. "You think you've won?" he said, his voice cutting through the noise. The room gradually fell silent. "You think this is justice. But let me tell you something about Justice McAllister. It's a game played by men with money and power. And I have more of both than you could ever imagine." He turned to face the crowd. "Do you think I'm the only one? Do you think there aren't 100 men just like me waiting to take my place? You've won a battle. Nothing more. The war goes on forever, and people like you always lose in the end." Sam stepped forward. "You're wrong." "Am I? You think this is about money, about land, about power?" Sam shook his head. "It's not. It's about something you'll never understand." "And what's that? Decency." Hartwell laughed a harsh, bitter sound. "Decency. How quaint. How utterly—" 20 years ago. Sam continued. "I saw a group of men hanging a girl from a tree. She was 16 years old. She'd stolen some eggs because she was hungry, and they were going to kill her for it." He pointed at Nalin. "I cut her down. I didn't do it because I expected anything in return. I did it because it was the right thing to do, because sometimes a man has to stand up and say this is wrong even when it costs him everything." He stepped closer to Hartwell. "That's what you never understood. That's why you're standing here in chains while the people you tried to destroy are free. Because decency isn't weakness, it's the strongest thing there is. Hartwell stared at him, and for just a moment something flickered in his eyes. Not regret, men like Hartwell didn't feel regret, but recognition maybe. The understanding that he had finally met something he couldn't buy or break. "Take him away," Cole ordered. The federal marshal stepped forward and took Hartwell by the arms. As they led him toward the door, he looked back one final time. "This isn't over, McAllister." "Yes, it is." The door closed behind him. And just like that, Cornelius Hartwell was gone. The celebration lasted well into the night. Someone brought out a fiddle, someone else produced a bottle of whiskey, and before long, the courthouse had transformed into an impromptu dance hall. Families who had spent years living in fear were laughing, crying, holding each other like they'd been given a second chance at life, because they had. Sam stood on the courthouse steps, watching the festivities through the open door. He should have been inside celebrating with the others, but something held him back. A hand touched his shoulder. "You're thinking too much." Nayland stood beside him, her face soft in the lamplight spilling from the windows. "Old habit?" "A bad one." She moved to stand in front of him. "What troubles you?" Sam was quiet for a long moment. Hartwell was right about one thing. There are 100 men just like him waiting in the wings. We stopped this one, but the next one's already on his way. Perhaps. Nayland tilted her head. But the next one will find something different when he arrives. He'll find people who know how to fight back. People who have stood together once and will stand together again. You really believe that? I have to. Her eyes met his. 20 years ago I was alone, dying, convinced that the world was nothing but cruelty and hatred. Then a stranger cut me down from a rope and everything changed. She reached out and took his hand. One act of kindness, Samuel. One moment of courage. That's all it takes to change the world. You taught me that. Sam looked at their joined hands, his weathered and calloused, hers strong and sure. What happens now? He asked. Now we rebuild. The families will return to their lands. The courts will untangle Hartwell's web of lies, and life will go on. She paused. But something will be different. Something important. What's that? Hope. She smiled. For the first time in a very long time, there's hope. Inside, the fiddle struck up a new tune. Through the window, Sam could see James Henderson spinning his wife across the floor, their children clapping and laughing. Dance with me. Sam blinked. What? Dance with me? Nayland's smile widened. I've been waiting 20 years for someone to ask, but apparently I have to do it myself. I'm not much of a dancer. Neither am I. We'll figure it out together. She pulled him toward the door, and Sam found himself laughing, actually laughing for the first time in longer than he could remember. They danced. It was awkward and clumsy, and nothing like the graceful waltzes Sam had seen at the fancy parties in Santa Fe. But Nayland's hand was warm in his, and her eyes never left his face, and somehow none of the rest of it mattered. When the song ended, they stood together in the middle of the floor, breathing hard. Not bad, Nayland said. For a first attempt. I've had worse experiences. She laughed a real laugh, full and unguarded, and Sam realized it was the first time he'd ever heard her laugh like that. Samuel. Yeah. Thank you. For what? For everything. Her voice dropped to a whisper. For cutting me down. For letting me go. For never giving up even when you had every reason to. Sam didn't know what to say. So he did something he'd wanted to do for longer than he cared to admit. He kissed her. It was brief and gentle, nothing like the passionate embraces in the dime novels he'd read as a young man. But when they pulled apart, Nayland was looking at him with an expression he'd never seen before. Well, she said softly. That took you long enough. I'm a slow learner. Clearly. But she was smiling. We should probably talk about this. Probably. Later. Later sounds good. They stood there in the middle of the celebration, surrounded by people who had fought together and won together, and Sam felt something he hadn't felt in 20 years. Peace. Not the absence of conflict. He knew there would be more battles ahead, more challenges, more reasons to fight. But peace in the deeper sense. The knowledge that he wasn't alone anymore. That whatever came next, he wouldn't face it by himself. Thomas Whitmore appeared at his elbow, his face flushed with excitement. "Mr. McAllister." "Sam, I just got word from Attorney Cole. The federal court has agreed to expedite the cases. All 18 families should have their lands restored within 6 months." "That's wonderful news." "It gets better." Thomas was practically bouncing. "Cole wants to set up a permanent office here in Silver Creek, someone to watch for future land fraud to protect settlers from men like Hartwell. He asked if I'd be interested in running it." Sam looked at the young man who had started this journey as Hartwell's puppet and ended it as something else entirely. "What did you tell him?" "I told him yes." Thomas's voice grew serious. "I know I can't undo what I did. I know there are people who will never forgive me. But maybe I can make sure no one else has to go through what these families went through. Maybe that's something." "It's more than something." Sam extended his hand. "Your father would be proud." Thomas's eyes glistened as he shook Sam's hand. "I hope so. I really hope so." He disappeared back into the crowd, and Sam turned to find Naylin watching him. "You're good at that," she said. "Good at what?" "Forgiveness." She moved closer. "Second chances. Seeing the best in people even when they've given you reason to see the worst." "I've had practice." "Yes, you have." She reached up and touched his face. "It's one of the things I love about you." The word hung in the air between them. Love. Neither of them had said it before. Neither of them had even come close. "Naylin." "Don't." She shook her head. "Don't say anything. Not yet. We have time now. Time to figure out what this is, what we are. There's no rush." "No rush," Sam agreed, but he was smiling, and so was she. The celebration continued until the small hours of the morning. By the time Sam finally made his way back to his ranch, the sky was beginning to lighten in the east. He rode slowly, savoring the quiet, letting the events of the past weeks settle into his bones. His land stretched out before him in the pre-dawn light, the cabin, the barn, the old oak tree at the edge of the property. It looked the same as it always had, but everything was different now. Naylin and her warriors had made camp near the creek. He could see their fires burning low, their horses grazing peacefully. They would stay, she had told him, at least for a while, until the legal matters were settled, until the families were safe, until she figured out what came next. Sam dismounted and led Copper to the stable. He was brushing her down when he heard footsteps behind him. Sheriff Crawford stood in the doorway, his hat in his hands. "Thought I might find you here." "Sheriff, you're up early." "Haven't been to bed yet." Crawford stepped into the stable. "Wanted to tell you something before the whole territory finds out." "What's that?" "I'm retiring." Crawford smiled at Sam's surprise. "Been thinking about it for a while. I'm 62 years old, my leg hurts every time it rains, and I've been doing this job for longer than most men live." "What brought this on?" "You did?" Crawford looked at him steadily. "What happened here, bringing those families together, standing up to Hartwell, changing the way this whole town thinks about justice? That's not something I could have done. I'm too old, too set in my ways. But you're not." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a badge. "Silver Creek needs a new sheriff. Someone people trust. Someone who'll fight for what's right even when it's hard." He held out the badge. "I can't think of anyone better than you." Sam stared at the badge, a simple star tarnished with age, worn smooth by years of service. "I'm not a lawman. Neither was I when I started. You learn." Crawford pressed the badge into Sam's hand. "Think about it. That's all I'm asking." He turned and walked out of the stable, leaving Sam alone with the weight of everything that had changed. The sun was rising now, painting the eastern sky in shades of gold and red. In the distance, Sam could hear the sounds of Nalen's camp coming to life. Voices, laughter, the whinny of horses. He looked down at the badge in his hand. 20 years ago, he'd been a young cowboy who wanted nothing more than to mind his own business and stay out of trouble. Now, he was something else entirely. A symbol, a leader. Maybe even a hero, though the word made him uncomfortable. He thought about everything that had led him to this moment. The hanging tree, the doctor's kindness, the years of isolation, the drought that had nearly destroyed him. He thought about Hartwell's sneering confidence and the way it had crumbled when the truth finally came out. He thought about Thomas Whitmore finding redemption in the ashes of his mistakes. And he thought about Nalen, the girl who had asked him why he saved her, the woman who had come back to save him. Sam closed his fingers around the badge. The door of the stable opened, and Nalen stepped inside. She was carrying 2 cups of coffee, steam rising in the cool morning air. "I brought you something." "Thanks." He took one of the cups and held it without drinking. "Crawford was just here." "I know. I saw him leaving." She nodded at his closed fist. "What did he give you?" Sam opened his hand. Nalen looked at the badge, then at him. "Are you going to accept?" "I don't know." He turned the badge over in his fingers. "A month ago, I would have said no. I wasn't the kind of man who led anything. But now I'm not sure who I am anymore." Nalen set down her coffee and took his face in her hands. "I'll tell you who you are. You're Samuel McAllister. You're the man who cut a dying girl from a rope because he couldn't stand by and watch her die. You're the man who spent 20 years building something real on a piece of land that everyone else had given up on. You're the man who brought 18 families together and stood up to the most powerful criminal in the territory." Her eyes held his. "You're the man I've been waiting 20 years to find again. That's who you are." Sam felt something crack open in his chest. All the walls he'd built, all the distance he'd kept, all the loneliness he'd accepted as the price of survival. Gone. All of it gone. "I love you," he said. The words came out rough, unpracticed, the words of a man who hadn't said them in longer than he could remember. But Nalen smiled like he'd just given her the world. "I know," she said. "I love you too." She kissed him, then not the brief, careful kiss from the celebration, but something deeper. Something that felt like a promise and a beginning and a homecoming all at once. When they finally pulled apart, the sun had fully risen. The ranch was bathed in golden light, and somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark was singing. "So," Nalen said, "are you going to take the job?" Sam looked at the badge one more time. Then he pinned it to his chest. "Yeah," he said. "I think I am." Nalen's smile was brighter than the morning sun. "Good, because I have a feeling this territory is going to need a good sheriff. And you? I'll be right here." She took his hand. "I told you once that I was looking for a place to call home. I think I've finally found it." They walked out of the stable together into the light of a new day. Behind them, 20 years of pain and loneliness faded like shadows at dawn. Ahead of them, the future waited, uncertain, challenging, full of possibilities neither of them could imagine. But they would face it together. And that made all the difference. 6 months passed like water through open fingers. The federal court in Santa Fe moved faster than anyone had expected. One by one, the 18 families received word that their lands had been restored. Their debts erased their names, cleared of the false charges Hartwell had manufactured. James Henderson was the first to return to his ranch, his wife Martha weeping as they crossed the threshold of the home they'd been forced to abandon 2 years before. Sam stood on the porch of his own cabin watching the wagon disappear down the dusty road and felt something settle deep in his chest. This was what victory looked like. Not glory, not celebration, just people going home. Nalen came to stand beside him, her shoulder brushing his. "The Fernandez family leaves tomorrow," she said. "Miguel asked me to thank you again." "He doesn't need to thank me." "I told him that. He insisted." She paused. "He also asked if you would consider being godfather to his newest grandson." Sam turned to look at her, surprised. "Me?" "You." Nayland smiled. "It seems you've made quite an impression on people, Sheriff McAllister." The title still felt strange on his tongue, strange against his chest where the badge rested, but he was getting used to it, slowly. "What did you tell him?" "I told him you would be honored." Sam shook his head, but he was smiling. "You know me too well." "I do." She took his hand. "And I plan to keep knowing you for a very long time." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher over the land that had nearly been taken from them. So much had changed. The drought had finally broken 3 weeks after Hartwell's arrest. Rain had come sweeping across the territory, gentle at first, then stronger, filling the streams and soaking the parched earth. Sam's cattle had begun to recover. The grass was coming back, green shoots pushing up through the cracked ground like small miracles, but the changes went deeper than weather. Silver Creek itself was different now. The people who had once turned their backs on Sam, who had called him a traitor and an Indian lover, now nodded respectfully when he walked down the main street. Some of them had even apologized, awkward, stumbling apologies that Sam accepted with grace he didn't entirely feel. He was learning that forgiveness wasn't a single act. It was a practice, something you had to choose over and over again. Thomas Whitmore had settled into his new role as the territory's first fraud investigator with a zeal that surprised everyone, including himself. He spent his days poring over land records, interviewing settlers, building cases against the smaller predators who had operated in Hartwell's shadow. 3 more corrupt land agents had been arrested in the past month alone. "I'm trying to make it right," he'd told Sam one evening over coffee. "I know I can never undo what I did, but maybe I can prevent it from happening to someone else." "That's all any of us can do," Sam had replied. "Try to leave things a little better than we found them." And then there was Nayland. She had stayed just as she'd promised. Her warriors had gradually dispersed, returning to their families in the mountains, but Nayland remained. She'd built a small cabin of her own on Sam's property near the old oak tree, the tree where everything had begun. They hadn't rushed anything. After 20 years apart, there was no need for hurry. They took long walks together in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. They shared meals. They shared silences. They learned each other's rhythms, each other's wounds, each other's dreams. And slowly, carefully, they built something new. "I want to show you something," Nayland said one morning, about 3 months after Hartwell's arrest. She led him to the old oak tree. Sam's breath caught in his throat. Where once there had been only bare ground and painful memories, now there was the beginning of a building. Wooden posts had been set into the earth, marking out the foundation of a structure that would be neither large nor grand, but solid, real. "What is this?" "The school." Nayland's voice was soft. "The one I told you about. A place where children from both our peoples can learn together." Sam walked slowly around the foundation, running his hand along the rough wooden posts. "You started this?" "I had help. Some of the families who got their land back wanted to contribute. They said it was the least they could do." She came to stand beside him. "I hope you don't mind that I built it here." "Mind?" Sam's voice was rough. "Nayland, He couldn't find the words, so he pulled her into his arms instead, holding her tight against his chest. "It's perfect," he whispered. "It's absolutely perfect." She held him back, her face pressed against his shoulder. "I spent so many years hating this place," she said. "The tree, the town, everything it represented. But you taught me something, Samuel. You taught me that places can change. That the same ground where something terrible happened can become ground where something beautiful grows." She pulled back to look at him. "This tree tried to kill me once. Now it's going to shelter children. That feels right somehow. Sam looked up at the branches spreading above them, the same branches that had held the rope around a 16-year-old girl's neck. It does, he said. It feels exactly right. The school opened on the first day of spring. It wasn't much: 4 walls, a roof, some benches, a chalkboard Thomas Whitmore had donated from his office. But it was enough. 12 children sat in those benches on the first day. 8 from settler families, 4 from the Apache band that had followed Nolan to Silver Creek. They ranged in age from 6 to 14, and they looked at each other with the wary curiosity of creatures meeting for the first time. Nolan stood at the front of the room, her heart pounding harder than it had during any battle. "Welcome," she said. "My name is Naylan. In my language it means Maiden of the Dawn. I'm going to be your teacher." A hand shot up. A small boy with red hair and freckles. "Yes." "Are you really Apache?" "I am." "My pa says Apaches are dangerous." Naylan considered this for a moment. "Your pa is right," she said. "We can be very dangerous. So can your people. So can anyone when they're frightened or angry, or fighting for what they love." She paused. "But we can also be kind. We can also be brave. We can also build things instead of destroying them. That's what we're going to learn here. How to build instead of destroy." The boy thought about this. "Okay," he said finally. "That sounds all right." A few of the other children giggled. The tension in the room eased slightly. Nolan smiled. "Good. Now let's begin." Sam watched from the doorway, his chest tight with an emotion he couldn't name. This was it. This was what they had been fighting for all along. Not just land, not just justice. Hope. The hope that 2 peoples who had been at war for generations could learn to see each other as human. The hope that children could grow up without the hatred that had poisoned their parents. The hope that the future could be different from the past. It was fragile, this hope. Sam knew that. One bad harvest, one misunderstanding, one act of violence could shatter it into 1,000 pieces. But it was real, and that was something worth protecting. The trial of Cornelius Hartwell took place in Santa Fe in the autumn of that year. Sam and Naylan made the journey together, along with Thomas Whitmore and several of the families who had testified against him. The federal courthouse was grander than anything in Silver Creek: marble columns, high ceilings, portraits of stern-faced judges lining the walls. Hartwell looked smaller somehow, sitting at the defendant's table in his prison clothes. The arrogance that had defined him was gone, replaced by something hollow and desperate. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Witness after witness took the stand, telling stories of forged documents, stolen land, ruined lives. The evidence Nolan had gathered was presented in meticulous detail: letters in Hartwell's own handwriting, bank records showing bribes paid, to officials' testimony from former employees who had finally found the courage to speak. When it was Sam's turn to testify, he kept his answers simple and direct. "Mr. McAllister," the prosecutor asked, "can you describe your first encounter with the defendant?" "He showed up at my ranch with a stack of papers claiming I owed him money. Money I'd never borrowed." "And what did you do?" "I told him I wouldn't be intimidated. I told him I'd fight." "And did you fight, I mean?" Sam glanced at Naylan sitting in the gallery with her head held high. "I didn't fight alone. That's the only reason I'm here today." The prosecutor nodded. No further questions. When the verdict came down guilty on all counts, the courtroom erupted. Hartwell was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. His assets were seized, his empire dismantled, his name reduced to a cautionary tale that would be told throughout the territory for generations. As the marshals led him away, Hartwell caught Sam's eye one final time. "You think this changes anything?" he hissed. "There will be others. There will always be others." Sam met his gaze steadily. "Maybe. But there will always be people like us too, people who stand up, people who fight back." He paused. "You lose Hartwell, not just today, forever. Because the people you tried to destroy are building something you could never touch, something that will outlast both of us. Hartwell's face twisted with rage, but the marshals pulled him away before he could respond. Sam watched him go, feeling nothing but a quiet satisfaction. It was over. Finally, completely over. Outside the courthouse, the families who had been wronged gathered together one last time. James Henderson shook Sam's hand, his grip firm and warm. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, "for everything. You don't need to thank me. Just take care of your family. That's thanks enough." Miguel Fernandez embraced him like a brother, tears streaming down his weathered face. "You gave us back our lives," he said. "We will never forget." One by one they said their goodbyes, the families who had lost everything, and founded again the people who had started as strangers and ended as something like family. When the last wagon had rolled away, Sam and Nolan stood alone in the plaza. "It's strange," Sam said. "I spent so many years trying to avoid getting involved in other people's problems, keeping my head down, staying out of trouble. And now I can't imagine living any other way." Nolan took his hand. "That's because you finally understand what your life is for. Not to avoid trouble, to make it mean something." Sam looked at her, this woman, who had changed everything, who had brought him back to life when he didn't even know he was dead. "Marry me." The words came out before he could stop them, before he could think about whether it was the right time, the right place, the right way to ask. But Nolan just smiled. "Yes." Just like that. Just like that. She stepped closer, her eyes bright. "I've been waiting 20 years for you to ask Samuel McAllister. Did you really think I would say anything else?" He kissed her then, right there in the plaza, with the autumn sun warming their faces and the whole world stretched out before them. And for the first time in his life, Sam felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The wedding took place at the ranch, under the old oak tree. It was a simple ceremony. No fancy decorations, no expensive dress, no string quartet playing in the background. Just Sam and Nayland, surrounded by the people who had become their family. Sheriff Crawford officiated, his voice steady, despite the emotion in his eyes. "We're gathered here today to witness the union of two people who found each other across every barrier the world could throw between them. Different cultures, different histories, different worlds." He paused. "But love doesn't care about barriers. Love doesn't see color or background or the weight of the past. Love sees only the truth of two hearts beating together." He turned to Sam. "Samuel McAllister, do you take this woman to be your wife, to stand beside her in joy and sorrow, in plenty and want, for as long as you both shall live?" Sam looked at Nayland, her face radiant in the afternoon light, her eyes holding everything he'd ever wanted and never dared to hope for. "I do." Crawford turned to Nayland. "Nayland, do you take this man to be your husband? To walk beside him on whatever path lies ahead, to share his burdens and his blessings, for as long as you both shall live?" Nayland's voice was strong and clear. "I do." "Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of New Mexico, I pronounce you husband and wife." Crawford smiled. "You may kiss your bride." Sam pulled Nayland into his arms and kissed her while the crowd cheered, settlers and Apache together, celebrating a union that would have been unthinkable a year ago. When they finally pulled apart, Nayland was laughing. "Well, Sheriff McAllister, what do we do now?" Sam looked around at the faces of the people who had gathered to witness this moment. James Henderson, with his arm around Martha. Thomas Whitmore standing quietly at the edge of the crowd, his face peaceful for the first time Sam could remember. The children from the school playing together in the grass, without a care for the color of each other's skin. He looked at the tree above them, the tree that had once been a place of death and was now a place of celebration. "Now," he said, "we live." The years that followed were not without challenges. There were droughts and floods, conflicts and compromises, moments when the fragile peace between the two communities threatened to shatter. But it never did. Because whenever the darkness crept in, someone would remember what they had built together. Someone would stand up and say, No, we don't go back to the old ways. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, things changed. The school grew. What had started as a single room under an oak tree expanded into a proper building with multiple teachers and students who came from miles around. Children who had grown up learning together became adults who worked together, married each other, built lives that blurred the lines their parents had drawn. Sam served as sheriff for 12 years before hanging up his badge. By then, Silver Creek had become something no one could have imagined when he first rode into that dusty town, a place where Apache and settlers lived side by side, where justice wasn't just a word, but a practice, where the sins of the past were acknowledged and slowly imperfectly healed. Naylin became a legend in her own right. The woman who had been hanged from a tree became the woman who built bridges between worlds. She traveled throughout the territory teaching mediating disputes, showing by example that peace was possible if people were willing to work for it. They had children, 2 boys and a girl who grew up speaking both English and Apache, who learned to ride and read and fight for what was right. Sam would sometimes watch them playing in the yard and feel tears prick his eyes at the miracle of it all. This family, this life, this second chance he'd never expected and didn't deserve. All because he'd cut a rope 20 years ago. On the 20th anniversary of that day, Sam and Naylin walked together to the old oak tree. It was different now. The school had been built around it, incorporating the ancient trunk into its very structure. Children's laughter echoed from inside, the sound of lessons and games, and the ordinary magic of young minds growing. They stood in silence for a long moment, looking up at the branches that spread above them like protective arms. "Do you remember what you asked me?" Naylin said softly. "That first night in your cabin. I asked your name. Before that, you asked why I kept coming back to this tree." Sam nodded. He remembered. "I told you that the places where we almost die become sacred, that they hold a piece of our spirit forever." She turned to face him. "I was right about that. But I didn't understand then what it really meant." "What does it mean?" Naylin took his hands in hers. "It means that our darkest moments can become our greatest gifts. The rope that nearly killed me led me to you. The hatred I faced taught me how to love. The death I escaped showed me how to live." She reached up and touched his face. 20 years ago you saved my life. But that was just the beginning. Every day since then you've been saving me in ways you don't even know. By loving me, by believing in me, by standing beside me when the whole world said we didn't belong together. Sam felt tears sliding down his cheeks. He didn't try to stop them. "I didn't save you," he said. "I just cut a rope. You saved yourself. You saved all of us. We saved each other." Naylin smiled. "That's the whole point, isn't it? That's what this story has always been about. Not one person rescuing another, but 2 people choosing to stand together. 2 people building something bigger than themselves." She gestured at the school, at the children inside, at the world they had created together. "This is what we built, Samuel. Out of hatred and pain and 20 years of waiting. This is what became possible because you refused to look away when a girl was dying in front of you." Sam pulled her close, holding her against his chest like he had so many times before. "I love you," he whispered. "I've loved you since the moment I cut that rope. I just didn't know it yet." "I know." She pressed her face against his heart. "I've always known." They stood there for a long time, the man and the woman whose lives had been woven together by a single act of courage, while the sounds of children learning drifted through the open windows of the school they had built on the ground where everything had changed. The sun was setting over the mountains to the west, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. It was beautiful. It was peaceful. It was home. And as Samuel McAllister held his wife under the branches of the old oak tree, he understood at last what his life had been for. Not to acquire land or build wealth or achieve glory. To love. To stand up when standing was hard. To believe that even the darkest places could become sacred if you filled them with enough light. That was the lesson of the hanging tree. The lesson of 20 years. The lesson of a single moment of courage that had rippled out through time and changed everything. Some people go through their whole lives without understanding what matters. Sam McAllister had learned it in the time it took to raise a gun and cut a rope, and he had spent every day since living by that truth. Dear friends, this story comes to an end, but the lessons it carries will live on in our hearts. Gratitude is not just a word. It is a debt that binds two souls together across time and distance and every obstacle the world can create. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the choice to act when acting costs everything. And love is not a feeling. It is a decision made over and over again to stand beside someone no matter what storms may come. 20 years ago, a young cowboy cut a dying girl from a rope. 20 years later, she came back to save him. And together they built something that would last forever. Some stories end with a wedding. Some end with a victory. Some end with a sunset fading over the mountains. This story ends with a truth. The world will try to break you. It will throw hatred and cruelty and injustice in your path. It will tell you that kindness is weakness, that love is foolish, that standing up for what's right will only bring you pain. Don't believe it. Because somewhere out there is someone whose life you will change with a single act of courage. And 20 years from now, when you have forgotten that moment, when you have moved on with your life and put it all behind you, they will come back, and they will save you right back. That is the promise of this story. That is the truth. Samuel McAllister and Nalin discovered under the branches of an old oak tree. And that is the truth I leave with you now. Thank you for walking this journey with me. Thank you for believing in a story about courage and love and second chances. I hope it touched your heart. I hope it reminded you that kindness matters, that justice is worth fighting for, that even the darkest night will eventually give way to dawn. Until we meet again, remember this. Every act of goodness ripples out through time in ways we cannot see. Be the person who cuts the rope. Be the person who stands up when no one else will. Be the person whose courage changes everything. That is how we honor the story of Samuel and Nalin. That is how we make their legacy our own. And that is how we build a world worth living in one act of love at a time.